Hey guys, welcome to Green Bean Fiction. So in today's video we are gonna see what if Deku had Harem of DXD girls, part 3. Before starting, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you are interested in MHA fanfictions. This story is High School DXD, A Hero's Arrival by Anthony Tyler 9. Now without wasting any more time, let's dive in. Izuku would wake up from his overuse of both One for All as well as his sacred gear. He never thought that fighting the god of mischief had made him use that much power. But he thought nothing of it as he focused on the thoughts he had before Loki was defeated. He could distinctly remember Loki screaming out at him through the pain of Mjolnir electrocuting him. Damn you, Red Dragon Emperor! I curse both you and the Crimson Ruin Princess. You will never know what true love feels like, were Loki's last words before being teleported away from the battlefield. Izuku looked down at his arms as he noticed that they were bulging with both power as well as seemingly strain. Lowering the power of One for All that had been used subconsciously, Izuku stared at his surroundings and found himself within the room given to him during his stay at the Gremory Mansion. If he really cursed me, I should inform Rias about this. It could cause us some problems later on if we try to continue our relationship. Izuku thought to himself as the person he was thinking about entered the room. Oh, you're awake. I thought you wouldn't wake up until tomorrow at the latest. How did you sleep? Rias asked, as she walked over to him. I'm fine, just having some thoughts about what Loki told me before he was sealed away. Izuku said, as Rias looked at him concerned. Is there something wrong with what he stated? Rias questioned as Izuku nodded. I think he cursed both you and me, Rias. Izuku said, as Rias looked shocked. We should probably inform Lord Odin as well as Circex. They're the only ones strong enough to break the curse. Rias said, as Izuku and the young woman had left the room. Had they paid more attention, they would have seen Xenovia looking at them in curiosity on the bed, as she had been completely naked and had some white fluids pouring out of her mouth. 4. Izuku and Rias stood before Circex. They had heard from the older brother of Rias that Odin had left as soon as his defiant son was placed inside his jail cell in Asgard. The old man had to return back to Asgard in order to set about Loki's punishment for attempting to break apart their treaty between Asgard and the Christian pantheon. So as Izuku and Rias explained their situation to Circex, the man had made it his mission to look over the love curses that he could know from Asgardian languages that he could read. And he immediately found the curse that was causing the two the most issues, since Izuku said he heard Loki curse both him and Rias at the same time before he was sealed away. Once Circex informed them about the way to break it, they had both set about breaking it instantly, and once the day was over the two could easily say that the curse was broken. All they really needed to do was go out on a date within the time frame, which was given, and the curse was broken. Izuku had never felt prouder of his ability to make Rias laugh more that day, and as the duo were returning to the home of the Gremory family, they found Rias Peerage preparing to leave. They had been told that they needed to return back to the human world before anyone got too suspicious about their leave of absence. They all soon returned back to Kuo as they prepared for their schooling for the rest of the year. Everyone knew that they'd have more homework to do over the vacation they were given, so made sure it was done as they left. Once Izuku returned back into the home of the Hyodos, he noticed something was wrong with the duo, especially since when he started living in Kuo, Miki wasn't showing signs of being pregnant. So the fact that she was around 5 months pregnant with a child made Izuku wary about how the woman was pregnant. Once she had informed him that because of Izuku's ability to have a relationship with two women made her and Goru decide to try for one last child of their own before making sure that they can't have any more children. They wanted this one to be a girl so that Izuku could be an older brother to her and wouldn't take no for an answer if he was against the idea. Izuku was just unhappy that he was left out of the question of being an older sibling. He was really protective of the younger children at the orphanage since he was the oldest there. He gave Miki a hug, stating that he would love to be an older brother, even if he wasn't their child by blood. And he would be going about his rest of the year looking much happier now that he was stated to becoming a bigger brother to the Hyodo family's newest child. He had informed Rias and the rest of the peerage about Miki's pregnancy, as well as they came and gave congratulations to the young soon-to-be mother and wished her well. Although unaware to the fact that Izuku was keeping an eye on the newborn who was gestating within Miki's womb during the night, as he used magic to keep the baby fed as well as healthy enough to survive birthing in another 4 months. As Izuku moved on with his life within Kuo, Azazel had informed Rias Peerage that the entire second-year classes would be having a field trip into Kyoto so that they could get an eye for some jobs there. Izuku was happy since he knew that the place was home to some of the best massage buildings that his orphanage mother took him to when he was younger. So he was aware of the fact that he would like to go to a massage building in order to decrease the amount of tenseness in his muscles. He had been training his body for the last 8 months since becoming a devil so that he could become as strong as possible as fast as possible. But he wanted to make sure that this trip would be completely therapeutic for him because all he wanted was a week of nothing but peace and quiet. Izuku was also informed that certain individuals who are a part of heaven as well as the Grigori would be joining in Kuo Academy and that he was given express permission to show them around. Nodding along to the idea, Izuku made sure to keep his mind out of the gutter when he found out that the people who were being brought into Kuo Academy's academy was Irina Shido as well as a fallen angel named Elizabeth. The young woman had an appearance that was similar to what the Bible had portrayed was Mary. The young girl had blonde hair that was done in braids as she looked around the age of at least 16. He showed the two around the school as they got close to the young man. He made sure to keep evil thoughts out of his head at the uniforms he saw them in. Diedrich, is it just me or are the girls from other factions just that much more beautiful? Izuku thoughtfully asked Diedrich within his mind. Last I checked, Elizabeth is just as beautiful as both Seraphal as well as Gabriel within heaven and hell respectively. So I can easily state that those who are born into the factions as members of each one are born beautiful. Diedrich supplied as Izuku sighed. It was later that evening that Izuku went out on his packed runs that he met up with Ochako Uraraka once more, and as soon as he was on school grounds once more, he found himself surrounded by UA staff. Can someone please inform me as to why the UA staff are surrounding me? Izuku asked as the entire class 1, it had looked at him confused. Most of all was Bakugo Katsuki as he glared at the devil boy with disdain as well as fury, but the rest of the class looked at one another. They don't trust you have good intentions since you're a devil. The last few times you were here, you did run away from them. Shiro called out. He was a boy with tape dispensers at his elbows. You all are aware that if I wanted nothing but harm to you all, I could easily kill you all with just my sacred gear, right? Izuku asked to the teachers as the black-haired one stepped forward. Show it to us and we can see if I can cancel it. He said seriously as Izuku summoned his sacred gear. Once his sacred gear was shown to the group as well as teachers, the black-haired man just sighed as he looked at the one in charge. A small animal with white fur as well as a scar running along its eye had stared at Izuku with awe as well as curiosity. You were telling us that with confidence, you could easily kill everyone within the school on your own. How so? We have a hero who could knock you out with her own quirk. The animal said, as Izuku stared at it. Well, if I had to say specifically, just knock out the woman with somnambulist. Then I could easily kill all of you without a second thought. I am the descendant of a dragon as well as a human, so her quirk might not work on me. But at the same time, with just a singular boost of my power I could easily kill all of you with one hit. That means you too, sir. Izuku said, as he pointed at a wall. So what are you doing here anyway? The small creature asked. I'm here to fulfill a contract between me and Uraraka-san, who I look towards as a smaller sibling. Izuku said, as the creature nodded. Well, what do these contracts mean for you? The creature asked. They ensure that I can grow stronger, but so long as I get something in return for my services, I can help out Uraraka-san with whatever she wishes. That is within reason, we do not take souls as a price. Izuku said, as the creature smiled. Well then, do you have that pamphlet that Uraraka-san gave us for this summoning? The creature asked. Izuku pulled one out and gave it to the creature as he left without much words. As Izuku looked at the black-haired man, the two stared at one another as the man stopped using his quirk. Just make sure that you don't take the souls of my kids. They are still learning how to become heroes. The man said, as Izuku stared at him. Why is Bakugo here? Izuku asked, with barely restrained rage. What are you talking about? The man asked looking back at Izuku. He shouldn't be allowed here with what he's done in the past, especially what he had done about 8 months ago. Izuku said, as the man gained a glint in his eye. Oh, that event. He was placed on probation. If he steps outside of that for even one event, he will be expelled. I do not allow bullies within my class. He has been getting better over time and I have seen fit that he stays here unless he becomes a villain on the street. The man said, as Izuku nodded. Keep an eye on him though, he might be hiding his true nature underneath the mask in order to try and bully others. I should know, because I was the victim for most of my life. Izuku said, as he left the man to think about what Bakugo had done to cause this much hatred from a mere glance at the boy. Within the safety of Uraraka's room, Izuku sat down at her chair as she looked ashamed of what she had done. Don't think that you did anything wrong, Uraraka. They told you to summon me just to make sure that I am not as dangerous as they think I am, although they have a reason to believe it. Izuku said, as Uraraka nodded. Could you help me with my homework again? Uraraka asked, as Izuku nodded. For a good portion of the night Izuku helped Uraraka with her calculus homework that she was given by her teacher who was named Ectoplasm. Once their time was up, Izuku gave the girl a hug that she was badly needing, especially since they were going on their work studies during this week. Don't worry about failing Uraraka-san, you will do great. Just make sure to keep an eye out for both yourself as well as those who are in danger. And a little word of advice from one person to another. Izuku said, as he looked at the girl in the eye. Uraraka looked at him as he smiled at her with the most heartwarming smile he could give as she felt her heart throb at it. It isn't those who are strong and powerful that are the strongest. It's those who can smile in the face of adversity, it is those who can smile in the worst of times, who are the strongest. Izuku said, as he gave the girl one last hug before disappearing in a magic circle. Returning back to Kuo, Izuku landed inside the bedroom that he lived in with the Hyodo family. Looking around the place he smiled sadly at how it had once been filled with fanservice memorabilia from Issei Hyodo, the previous son of the family who lived in this exact room. Shaking his head from the sad look on his life up until this point in time, Izuku focused on going to bed since there was going to be a field trip the next day over to Kyoto. Getting into the bed, Izuku fell asleep as he thought about how well the trip was going to go for the next week and a half. Although waking up the next morning, Izuku wasn't prepared to have both Rias and Ravel leaning on his chest from both sides. So as he felt the two breathing softly on his chest, he slowly pulled himself from their grips as he headed to the shower. Entering the shower, he never noticed how much different it was compared to how it originally was. So entering the bath, he sat down as he cleaned his hair as well as body from how he wanted to be much cleaner for the journey to Kyoto. With that finished, he went into the kitchen and this time he noticed how much larger it was compared to how it was originally. Wait, what in the world? What happened to the house? ? Izuku called out concerned. At this point Miki had entered the kitchen herself and smiled at Izuku with a happy look on her face as she greeted him. Morning Izuku, are you planning on making breakfast for everyone again? Miki asked, as Izuku nodded. Well, make sure that you are able to keep the girls from eating everything. A new mother needs to eat all she can for her unborn child. Miki said, as Izuku nodded. Moving back towards the countless stoves in the kitchen, Izuku set about making the best breakfast that he could for Miki as the woman had started to drink some tea. Izuku was making some healthy eggs and bacon with some toast for Miki, and the same was for everyone else as soon as they woke up. Once Izuku finished making the breakfast, he entered the room to find Rias, Ravel, Akano, Kaneko, as well as Gasper sitting at the table. Miki had returned to the table with her robes over her body as she grabbed some bacon as well as eggs for her to eat and start her morning. The rest of the peerage did the same as they prepared or the day they would have and continue on to school not much later in the morning. Arriving at school with some time to spare, the group split up and entered their respective classrooms in order to get through the day as fast as possible. With the classes going over the homework they had done previously, Izuku had managed to complete any and all assignments that he would need to finish on the trip to Kyoto. As the day continued onward, Izuku noticed how one of their classes had lost a teacher and was replaced with the Valkyrie who had once been Odin's bodyguard. It wasn't much longer that he found out the woman's name was Rosweiss, and she hailed from Norway as she was happy to become a new teacher for the history class. But by the time she was finished with her introduction, it was time for Izuku's lunch as he left, grabbed it, and went over to the Orc Old School building in order to talk to Azazel about what had happened previously. Entering the room, he was met with Rias complaining about how her seat in the clubroom was taken from her as Azazel turned himself around in the seat. Well, at least the Red Dragon Emperor has finally shown us that he finally arrived. Now for the plans for what we will be doing in the yokai territory, Azazel said, with a slight joking tone, before smiling at the group. Well, what are we waiting for, Azazel-san, what is the plans? Izuku asked, as someone else entered the room. Hello everyone, I apologize for being late. Someone from the faculty had been asking me if I wanted to spend a night with him and I refused. Rosweiss said, as she fixed her tracksuit. Izuku appreciated the fact that the woman was very beautiful looking inside the tracksuit and looked back at Azazel. Well, the plans for the trip on the second-year students for this group is the simple fact that, well, Rias and Akino will not be present for this quest, the same for those who are within the first-year course. Azazel said, as Ravel, Akino, Rias and Kaneko looked quite disheartened about that. Izuku gave the Neko girl some head pats as the girl leaned into the rugs as Izuku looked back at Azazel. Azazel would soon inform them all about how they would follow a set route in order to complete the tour of the city and stay there for a few days before coming back to Kuo in time for the Young Devils tournament to come up within the next few weeks. As Izuku knew that this meant that he wouldn't get much time to train himself, he knew that it would allow him some time to learn how to be a proficient swordsman. But that was for the future. The group had all left the building as Izuku prepared to head out on the bus with Zenobia, Irina, and all the second-year students within Kuo. It wasn't until a few hours later that the entire second-year group of students had arrived within Kyoto with Azazel and Rosweiss. Izuku was taking in the sights since he hadn't gone to Kyoto in a while and was taking pictures with his phone and sending them to the orphanage that he used to live in, providing them with images of how beautiful the city was, and they replied some more happy comments and informed him to have fun. The day continued further on as Izuku kept an eye out for those who wanted to do harm to his class as well as himself. He was happy that the two swordswomen who were next to him were walking nearby. He wanted to have some backup in the form of the two girls behind him if someone was strong enough to fight him or defeat him on their own. The entire second-year course had started to move throughout the entire city of Kyoto as Izuku kept an eye out on the people who were keeping watch over their group. He had noticed the small powers circling around them with both curiosity as well as complete and utter worry. They had been looking around the area for someone or something, but he had no clue as to what they were looking for. And sure enough, a small form had slammed into his hip causing him to stumble slightly, and as he looked down towards the ground, he found a small girl with long orange, blonde hair sitting on the ground. Kneeling before the small form, he held out a hand in order to see if she was all right. Hey, are you okay? I'm sorry for knocking you to the ground, Izuku asked, as the small girl looked up at him. It's fine, I'm sorry for running into you. See, could you keep me safe? The girl asked, as Izuku gained a glint in his eyes. Who are you running from? Izuku asked, as the girl stated that she was running from her kidnappers. So Izuku picked up the girl and brought her along whilst she sat on his shoulders. He even started to explore the area behind Azazel, standing very close to the taller man. Azazel had noticed the young girl on Izuku's shoulders and had made sure that the girl was covered in magic that protected her from detection. As they continued to walk around the area, a group of people had run by looking frantic as they called out to one another. And Izuku would hear what they would be speaking to one another about, and he wasn't happy with how they were speaking. We need to find the girl. Yusaka will be under our control if we can get her back, one of the people said, as Izuku kept up with Azazel. As soon as they both disappeared around the corner, they went over to the hotel that they all were staying at for the duration of the adventure into Kyoto. As soon as they were all inside the hotel, Izuku made sure the girl was safe in his hotel room as he sat down on his bed with the girl sitting next to him. Can you tell me your name? I need to know who you are before I can help you, Izuku asked, as the girl hesitated. My name is Kei Kuno, and my mother is Lady Yusaka. She is the leader of the yokai faction, the little girl, Kuno said. As Izuku let this settle within his mind, Azazel had entered the bedroom and found Izuku sitting on the bed conversing with the girl. They both were talking about heroes as well as other beings within the human world who were part of the supernatural. They had both connected on the feeling of having no true parents, well except for the fact that Yusaka was Kuno's mother. Not to mention that Lady Yusaka was the leader of the faction whose territory they were staying within. So Izuku was rightfully concerned that his class as well as himself would be attacked by those within the yokai faction. But Izuku had felt like he recognized one of the voices back at the area where those people were looking for Kuno. It was here the little girl had let out her true form, as fox ears had shown up on her head, as well as a couple yellow tails behind her. It was so sudden that the young man had pulled out his notebook about the supernatural and started to draw her appearance. As the two were completely distracted with Izuku questioning her abilities as well as how good she was in magic, Azazel had contacted Yusaka and informed her about where her daughter was located. The woman had contacted him back, telling him that she was on her way over to the hotel with some guards. She needed to be sure that nobody saw her. It wouldn't be until later at night when Yusaka would arrive inside Izuku's hotel room where Yusaka was revealed to the young man. And truthfully, Izuku could easily tell that his lower half of his body was getting excited as his small mite was getting prepared to rear his ugly head. Shaking himself from the beautiful woman who was regally walking into the room, he sat on the bed and bowed his head at her entrance. The woman nodded back at him before sitting on the bed looking to her sleeping daughter on his bed. "I take it you're the young man who rescued my daughter unknowingly from villainous fiends who were after my power?" she asked, as Izuku nodded. Looking at the woman again, his mind started to show him that this woman was to be completely feared at the moment. She was a mother first, and a faction leader second. But at the same time, he couldn't help but admire her form. Long blonde hair that extended to near her rear, a large bust that his female classmates would kill to have, as well as 9 long yellow tails coming from just above her very thick rear. Shaking his head at the perverted thoughts, he believes that his draconic side is trying to pick up the pieces of when he was growing up. "Thank you for saving my daughter. Do you know who the people were who are trying to control me and my faction?" Yusaka asked, as Izuku shook his head. "As much as I know, someone out of their group sounded familiar, but that is all I know," Izuku said, as Yusaka took that answer as a win. Standing up from the bed and picking up her daughter, Yusaka left the room with all the regal swag she had. But something caught Izuku off guard. The woman was swaying her hips in a hypnotic way that his nose twitched before he shook his head, regaining his self-control, but heard the woman giggle. "So you really are having trouble with the supernatural, Red Dragon? Well, if you wish to have some fun, then you can come by my palace anytime," Yusaka said, with a wink. As Izuku watched the woman leave the room, Azazel had announced his presence to Izuku once more as he chuckled. "Out of all the people in the world to be coming after your bones. I feel sorry for you, Midoriya, but anyway, we need to continue with our journey around the town tomorrow. Get some sleep, you'll need it," Azazel said, as Izuku nodded along. The image of Yusaka swaying her hips stuck in his mind, not to mention the fact that she essentially told him to give her a booty call whenever he wanted. 2. He went to bed with a raging boner that had to be dealt with early on in the night. The next morning Izuku had woken up inside the hotel as he shook his head about the place in order to get the thoughts about Yusaka out of his head. He had a group of people who were really kind to him as well as helped him throughout his time with his life and didn't need to add another person. Getting up from his bed, he had made sure to collect his things and prepare for the journey around Kyoto with Azazel and Rosswise as they were the teachers. Arriving in the cafeteria within the hotel, Azazel gains the attention of the classes as well as those in different classes with his coughing. "Now that I have all of your attention, I certainly hope that your first night within Kyoto meets your expectations. I have been stated by the school to inform you all about where you are allowed to head to within the day before the end of the tour. We will be looking around the city and exploring the edges of it in order to get some things prepared for your essays that need to be done at the end of the trip. You all are to write about something you all enjoyed on the field trip to Kyoto as well as talk about its infrastructure and politics. Now that that's finished, we can finally head out within the next few minutes. Make sure to use the bathroom early, since we won't be able to use it on our journey," Azazel said, as he left the students and Izuku to eat to their heart's content. As the young man was eating his food, He felt the power of one for all coursing through his body, acting as if it wishes to be released for once. Letting his power grow outward, he focused on a smaller percentage in order to keep it from being found out. As soon as everyone was finished with their breakfast, they had left the cafeteria in order to wait outside the hotel for further instructions from Azazel. Izuku was the last to exit the building as he had been conversing with his familiar as she had come by to say hello. "Hey, do you know what we will be doing for our adventure, Midoriya?" A girl asked, as Izuku turned to look at them. He found that it was just Irina, as the girl had made herself known nearby, and Izuku smiled at her for but a moment. "So the plan is to head to the shrine on the hill in the distance first, then we are to move about Kyoto and explore the city to our heart's content. We are able to split up as well in order to take in the sights alone or with doubles," Izuku said, as the girl nodded along. Xenovia as well as a few other girls had stood next to him as well in order to head in the direction he was planning on going. But the group were surprised when they watched him move to a graveyard within Kyoto early on and walk through the graves before stopping at one of them. Walking through the graveyard, Izuku looked for the specific tombstones that he was searching for. He had done some research on his biological parents and found out that they were killed in a suspicious villain attack about a few days after dropping him off at the orphanage that Mickey and Goro had adopted him from. As soon as he found the tombstones he was in search of, he held a small bouquet of flowers for both graves as he kneeled over them. They ranged from chestnut flowers as well as roses of different colors as he placed them on the ground between the two. Looking at the gravestones in particular, Izuku found that they had some grass growing over them and pushed them aside and flattened them to the ground. He stared at the tombstones closely as he read out the names as well as the dates the two were born and died at. Midoriya Hisashi Midoriya Inko. Date of birth: March 20, 2153. Date of birth: July 25, 2172. Date of death: June 17, 2205. Date of death: June 17, 2205. Izuku stared at the two whilst his audience had stared at him in wonder before they heard him start to talk to the gravestones. "You know, I thought that I'd meet you both at some point within this world. But to find out that you both died to a villain attack about a couple days after my birth. It hurt really badly. I will never get to know you both as a person nor as a son of potentially two great parents who just never got their chance to be parents. I hope that wherever you both are sitting at, you can be happy with the life I've lived up until this point," Izuku said, as he looked at the gravestones. Staring at them softly, he didn't know why, but something about them made his mind give something he never got growing up. He gained a small visage of what they looked like in his mind: a black-haired man with curly hair and black eyes with freckles not too dissimilar to his own. And a woman who had long green hair as well as skinny and very beautiful in her looks, but the most important part about the two of them was that the man's eyes were slitted, and the women were a pure radiant dark green color. At this image he never thought he'd get of what they'd look like, since all images of what the people looked like when he was told had been completely destroyed. So as he sat there experiencing this moment, a small tear had flowed out from his eyes, something that he never had dealt to him before. Shaking his head, he stood up and looked out into the distance before making a promise to the gravestones that belonged to his biological parents. "I will make sure that I become the best person I can be, even if it is within the world of the supernatural," Izuku muttered to the gravestones before bowing to them, leaving with a sad expression, but at the same time, a more determined as well as flaming passion within his eyes. After meeting up with his squad, the group had met up with Azazel and the others near the shrine and explored further within Kyoto, even having another interaction with Kuno as well as Yusaka as the two waved at Izuku as the young man explored the shrine earlier in the day. Of course, Yusaka had made sure to appeal to the young man the entire time as he saw her multiple times. The group were making their way through a small roadway, and which would meet up with Rosswise, who had taken another group another direction and was told to meet up with Azazel at the street the man was walking down with his entire group of students. But as the group was making their way down the road, there was a massive mist that was blocking any and all view from everyone as they walked about the place. I can't see a thing through this. Motohama called out, as he swung his arm around, accidentally hitting Matsuda in the face, breaking his glasses in the process. You dick, I have to pay $200 for that. The boy screeched at the taller boy. But Izuku was getting a very bad feeling as he felt the presence of multiple people nearby as he made his way towards Azazel. As soon as the young man was standing next to the fallen Kadri, he told the man about the presences he senses as Azazel informed him to stick to his plan to protect the students. And as soon as Izuku was about to place a protective shield around the group of students, a group of people emerged from the mist and attacked Azazel and Izuku immediately. Izuku summoned his sacred gear in order to protect himself as he blocked a strike from a very long spear that had nearly hit his chest. So you are the Red Dragon Emperor. Valley has told me quite a lot about you. A voice called out as his face was obscured by the mist. Izuku swung his gauntlet around and moved the mist around, missing his target, and as he searched the mist using his draconic abilities, he gained from D-Drag. He searched for heat signatures, but found none that could assist him in finding the ones who attacked him and his class. But as soon as he was about to turn around and head back to the class, he felt a presence near him and swung his arm backwards. He heard the sound of a very feminine "eep" as he looked back at the person who had gotten this close to him through the mist without his senses flaring up in warning. Looking at the woman much closer now that he was standing in front of her, he had to say that she looked really beautiful. She had long blonde hair that was done in a Rapunzel-like hairstyle of braids mixing into a ponytail. Her short form had made her perfect for getting up close and personal without being noticed, but at the same time, it caused her to look somewhat childlike in nature. She was only about 2 heads shorter than Izuku himself, but that didn't mean she wasn't deadly as she held a small rapier within her hand. Her eyes were what set him off in his mind, as he continued to wonder to himself. Our women in the supernatural were just naturally beautiful and very curvaceous. The girl blushed as soon as that thought came to him, and he suddenly did the same as he realized he had muttered it out. As soon as that thought was out and in the open, the two just stared at one another before the girl just decided to peace out and run away. She was replaced with a taller man who had been completely covered head to toe in bronze armor as he glared at Izuku. I am hoping for a good match, Red Dragon, the man said, before swinging a giant mace towards the young man. Pulling up his arm, he blocked the strike, but it allowed the taller man to throw a punch that landed on Izuku's gut, sending him into the air. Opening his devil wings, Izuku flew higher into the air as he prepared to use his power in order to remove the mist from the area. I am getting sick and tired of having my senses dysfunctional, so how about you all just get out of the mist already? Izuku called out, using his aura in order to remove the mist from the immediate area. As soon as the mist was completely removed, he searched the immediate area for the people who he had just come into contact with and soon found them across the road from him. Landing next to Azazel, he stared at the group as they glared at the two from the underworld. What brings you all here? I thought the heroes faction broke up into different factions. Azazel questioned as the group scoffed. That was because of the fact that quirks had become a thing in our world, but that doesn't mean that we won't allow for you both to leave here without your lives, the leader said, as he glared at the two. The leader was a very tall man, just a few inches shorter than Azazel himself, but with blue hair as well as blue-gray eyes. He had a smug smirk on his face that caused Izuku to feel as if the man was just testing out their power before going in for the kill. What are you planning? Surely there's a reason for you to be here in the yokai's territory. Are you asking for a war between the heroes and yokai? Izuku questioned now as he stared at the small group of fighters. What are you talking about? We want a war, all right, and we will be taking out those who are not joining us. Speaking of, why don't you join the heroes faction? We could help you get those pesky evil pieces out of your body, thereby turning your body back human without any kind of repercussions, the man said, as Izuku stared at him for a moment. I'm so confused. I thought you would die without the evil pieces. Wouldn't whatever you plan to do to me if I were to hypothetically join you all, and you all take my evil pieces out of my body, wouldn't that you know what is keeping me alive at this point in time? Just let me die, Izuku asked, as the group of people just stared at their leader with an equally confused look. Just because it stated that you would die from taking your evil pieces out of your body, doesn't mean that if someone else takes them out through another method will kill you instantly. The man said, moving towards Izuku. Our protagonist had watched with bated breath as the man walked towards him and without a second to prepare or do anything to defend himself. He was pierced through the chest faster than he could even think to react. Gah! Izuku screamed in agony, as the spear had pierced through his heart. It seems as if the pieces that were placed in you are holding your heart together. No matter, I can easily take them out and replace the matter with the original parts. The man said, as he sent a pulse of holy energy in Izuku's body. Gah! Izuku screamed out as the holy energy had pulsed through his body. And soon after the event happened, 8 pieces of pawns as well as 1 mutated pawn had flown out of his body without any kind of repercussions. Due to all the pain that was going on through his entire body, Izuku just fell to his knees as he tried to process the event that happened. Looking over to Azazel who was trying to make his way over to him, Izuku stared at the man as he thought of what will happen. What did you do to me? Izuku asked, before passing out on the ground. As soon as the dark abyss of unconsciousness took him from the world, the man who had taken his devil hood from him had smiled evilly at him. So it can actually work. Well, it seems that I've gotten myself a very powerful ally. Even if I have to force him to do things he doesn't wish to do. The man said, before looking at Azazel and with a smile promising to make sure that everything will end. Teleported away with Izuku in tow. Irina, Xenovia as well as Azazel had flown over to the spot as soon as the others had teleported away and landed near the 8 pawns on the ground. Azazel was releasing a powerful aura that promised pain to those who had come near to talk to him, as if to rub further salt into the wound. Rosweiss had shown up at that moment talking about how there was a massive barrier around the place that was taking everything she had in order to break it. Irina and Xenovia were staring at the bloody pawns as they twitched with raw energy and moments later, exploded with a massive bang. The event of Izuku being kidnapped by the hero faction had placed everyone within the underworld as well as the yokai factions under complete panic. The Red Dragon Emperor had been dispelled of his pawn pieces as well as everything that he had worked for all for naught. His entire class as well as peerage mates were immediately away from Kyoto as the leaders of each faction between the yokai and the underworld leaders were trying to find Izuku's location. The one taking the kidnapping of Izuku the worst was both his adopted parents of Hyodos as well as Rias. The 2 parts of them were very worried for his safety. They hadn't prepared for something like this to happen before. Mickey and Guro had put out a missing person paper slip out for the local police in order to search for the young man. But with all the problems around Musudafu as well as other towns nearby, Izuku's case was put on hold to focus on more important things. Rias, though, was doing everything in her power to search for Izuku since she couldn't exactly take part in the whole rating game tournament between her and some other young devils unless Izuku was on her team. Sears X had stated that the Young Devils tournament would be taking place a few months after the whole attack they received from Loki. And with her older brother searching through heaven and hell for Izuku, she was becoming more and more worried that he wouldn't be capable of being found. The days continued to pile up as the search for Izuku was starting to become more and more impossible to complete as everyone was still preparing for the Young Devils tournament. And without Izuku present, Rias Peerage was having struggles with training themselves to become stronger. The ones who were hit the hardest were Xenovia and Irina, as the 2 were right next to Izuku as he was impaled by the true Longinus as well as stood nearby when his evil pieces were expelled from his body. They were also in critical condition due to the power that the pieces had released from being without the body to power up. And without the body holding their power in, they expanded their reach until they reached critical mass and exploded, causing both Angel and Devil to be placed in the Sea-Tree Hospital within the underworld until they recovered. Everything was not going according to plan, and they had to do everything in their power just to be sure that they could get Izuku back. No matter the cost. Days turned into months, as the Young Devils tournament had soon arrived. Saraorg as well as his peerage had defeated Sona as well as another devil group before reaching the finals. Rias had managed to defeat her own opponents without much fanfare until she reached Diodora Astaroth, and wasn't that a fuck up in its own right. Rias was currently trying to get to Asia as the bastard Deodora had managed to kidnap Asia during the whole raiding game and was trying to take her pieces out and replace them with his own to rape her. Everything was definitely not going according to plan, and as soon as the group had arrived to save her, they had defeated Deodora as he could only put up a shield when their battle was interrupted. Almost as fast as Deodora had started to laugh at the Grimoire peerage, he was killed in an instant as the new arrival radiated power beyond anything the group could imagine. And the fight was immediate. The new arrival had introduced himself as Shalba Beelzebub, the descendant of the original Beelzebub. And he was constantly attacking the small peerage with what appeared to be weak attacks that caused massive damage to the peerage. They were all wondering what they were supposed to do against someone who had managed to kill Deodora without any problems. But that was when they noticed it, a magic circle appearing behind Shalba as the man glared at the group before smiling at them. I won't be the one to finally put an end to the Grimoire family's prodigy. He will, Shalba said, revealing a chained young man with green hair. His eyes were dull, and he was showing an expressive facial expression towards the group in front of himself. With that, Shalba released the chains over the boy before he stared at them, Rias immediately noticing the freckles over his face. Izuku, Rias asked, in shock as the rest of her peerage had stared at him in shock as well as fear. As soon as Izuku fell to the ground with a thud, the group ran over to him as he slowly stood back up. Asia was taken away from them and placed in the dimensional gap by Shalba before killing Deodora and focusing on their peerage. Izuku stood back up to his full height as he looked at those who he considered his peerage mates as well as close friends. His eyes were dull and looked as if he couldn't even see them, and once Rias and the rest of her peerage began to ask him what happened, the boy immediately glared harshly at them, activating his sacred gear. But as soon as he noticed a glaring disappearance from one of the peerage, he asked a singular question that had a lot of emotion in it. "Where is Asia?" Izuku asked, as Rias slowly frowned. "Shalba killed her, Izuku. I don't know what happens in the dimensional gap, but she will slowly die there if nobody can find her," Rias said, as Izuku glared at the ground. It was starting to crack under the aura that was building up underneath him, causing all those near him to move back slightly in worry as well as slight fear. "Grr," Izuku growled as small white wisps had appeared around him. Rias and the others watched as Izuku's body started to massively mutate and become larger in height. His body itself was slowly becoming more draconic in nature as his face became a snout with a golden horn on the nose. The hair sitting on his head became a massive mane of fur moving around his lower back, and his neck elongated to about 4 meters in length. His dull emerald eyes becoming slits in mere moments as he growled, more akin to a young dragon in fury. From afar, Shalba had watched the interaction, believing that the brainwashing over the young dragon emperor was enough to push him over the edge to kill his once allies. A few months earlier, Izuku laid on the ground inside a massive basement. He had no clue as to where he was located but kept his guard up. He felt his power at the lowest it's ever been in his life, and he couldn't help but think that Dedrag was feeling winded from how weak his partner was in this moment. "Dedrag, what happened?" I can't remember what happened. "Where are we?" Izuku asked in his mind. But all he was greeted by was darkness as well as silence. Dedrag, for the first time in months since he was awakened, was silent. It caused Izuku to slowly begin thinking that he lost all contact with Dedrag, and that someone stole the sacred gear itself from him. Forgetting about the fact that once the sacred gear is stolen from their user, the user themselves are killed. He went to stand up in the empty room before feeling chains all over his person, and as he struggled to move around, he felt it. Small sources of power throughout the chains that were draining his energy, and that was when he felt a massive shock all over his body. "Griya!" Izuku screamed in pain, his entire body glowing in a massive blue glow as his power and body was shocked with electricity. "Well, it seems that he is fully awake. Welcome to the land where you will fall into our command." Red Dragon Emperor, a voice called out. Looking around the room with weak eyes, Izuku found purchase on a person floating in the air high above him. "W. Who or why, you? W. What do you want with me?" Izuku stuttered as his body twitched from the electrocution. "I am here to make sure that the brainwashing goes according to plan. I can't have you betraying our cause so soon, especially with that bratty dragon who is withheld within your soul," the voice called out. As soon as Izuku felt some light being shown in the room, he found that the man was tall, extremely so, as he held 12 black devil wings on his back as he glared at him with dark blue eyes. His silver hair showing that he was at least Valley's ancestor in terms of blood alone, but Izuku couldn't make a sound as he couldn't speak after screaming so loud. Do you think that you see, can brainwash me that easily? Izuku asked, as he chuckled in a raspy voice. Oh, I don't need to think. I know I can. You humans are so easily brainwashed with magic, but your mind is a very protected place. Even I was having issues in controlling your mind. You have a potential to become the strongest devil, angel, dragon of everything in this world. Your potential is so great, you could probably become even stronger than Trihexa, the one being who put fear in God himself. Before being killed by Kokobile, the man said, as he landed in front of Izuku. He used magic in order to pull the chains into the air, putting Izuku in a starfish position in the air as he grunted in slight pain from the pulling of his arms and legs. I won't fall from brain, washing. Why, you can do anything. Why, you want to me. I have nothing. Why, you need to take. Izuku said, as he grinned at the man. Said man scowled before letting out another pulse of electricity into the young man's body as he screamed in agony once more. Once the charge was done, Izuku's body started to steam from the heat of the charge as he grunted in pain slightly but coughed out a laugh. Is that all? Why, you got? Izuku asked, grinning again. The man released another massive charge of electricity, causing Izuku's body to become slack as he grunted in pain this time. The man changed tactics this time, and moving from electrocution, he started to burn Izuku's body as Izuku growled in slight pain this time. The flames causing bad memories to come up from a certain young man with blonde hair exploding his body. I'm well acquainted with flames as well as burns, sir, if that's all you got. Then I am disappointed, Izuku said, raspy voice able to say a full sentence before coughing. The man scowled even harder as he used everything in his arsenal of torture as well as mind games in order to break Izuku's mind. The young man taking each beating as well as mental anguish with gusto as well as making sure that his mental state didn't change at all. They beat him half to death, electrocuted him, burned him, waterboarded him, as well as used weapons to deal as much damage to him without killing him outright. But apparently nothing was working. It wasn't until Izuku's mind was on the brink of having the mental walls he built up break apart and fall that they managed to find something worthy of brainwashing him. They had threatened those he loved as well as cared for back in Musudafu as well as Kuo town. As a matter of fact, they told him that as soon as Miki Hyodo's child was born, they would kidnap it and murder it in front of him. And that was when they saw a new power within him, a green electric lighting moving around him as he pulled on the chains as soon as the newborn was brought into this. His eyes had become slits as he pulled on the chains. Hardin had managed to break a few of them, causing his first breakout from their grasp. It wasn't until the hero faction had arrived and fought him until he wasn't able to move anymore that they were able to place him back into the chains. Much more powerful chains this time. And once that was done, they tried mental manipulation as well as brainwashing magic once more and found that his mind was on the verge of breaking before he escaped. It had rebuilt itself a bit to reinforce the walls, but it wasn't enough as the brainwashing magic placed him in a feeling of weightlessness where he couldn't feel anything. It was here that they decided to take him on his first mission, to kill the ones that he called his friends and family. And as soon as he was interacting with the people from his old peerage, he felt something spur him into action. A feeling of a need to kill them screaming at him within his mind. But as soon as he noticed someone missing, he heard about how the one who told him that they were the enemy had killed the one he was supposed to kill himself. That was when everything caused the brainwashing effects to fall away from his mind, as small little voices had made their tones heard to him, begging him to activate his juggernaut drive, but he pushed those words to the side. He couldn't use that power. He needed to use the power he had built up until the moment his pieces were taken from him without consent. And as he increased in height up to about 15 meters in height, he looked around the battlefield for who was the one to put him up to this. And he ran towards the floating man in a fur coat as he roared out to the heavens in both anger and fury. Nobody touches those he cares about, and it was here that a few more voices from All Might's quirk had made themselves known. Ninth, don't let your fury get to you, said the first voice. Just don't hurt yourself with your actions and keep those devils away from your battle, said the second voice. If you want revenge, it is best served cold, but you need to make sure that you can control your mind first, said the third voice. I am with you all the way, just make sure that he suffers without you losing yourself, said the fourth voice. You can't let your anger control you, let it be your tool, said the fifth voice. Let your mind and body combine into one form, do not let the draconic instincts control you. The sixth voice called out. I am here with you, little ninth, protect the ones you love. Like an older brother and father figure. Be the parent, sibling I could never be. The seventh voice called out. I am here, to make sure that you don't forget why you are my successor. You are the one person WHO showed that it isn't a quirk that makes us a hero, it is our actions to get there that do. Now clench your butt cheeks and yell smash. The eighth voice called out loudly, much more so than the rest. Outside the mental mindscape, Izuku's draconic form roared out to the heavens as he flew towards Shalba with the fury of an angered dragon. Shalba had no time to prepare for the sudden attack before his left arm was taken away with a swift move from Izuku. As the man moved backwards with his missing limb bleeding profusely, the draconic form of Izuku spat out the arm before turning over to the devil. How are you able to move without the brainwashing? I was told you were brainwashed, Shalba called out, as if he was throwing a tantrum. You made a horrible mistake, Shalba Beelzebub, you took away what belonged to my host. And now you will suffer the consequences of angering a dragon. Dedrag called out, as Izuku roared as well. And with that, Shalba was tossed around the battlefield as the leaders of Hell, Heaven, as well as the Grigori had arrived to watch from afar. The dragon took each limb of Shalba himself and left the man on the ground without anything to block the next attack as well as escape with his life. Izuku's draconic form landed in front of the fearful Satan descendant as he opened his mouth as an electric beam of energy made of a green color had formed and was charging up. This can't be happening. I was supposed to replace Ajuka. Shalba called out, coughing up blood. And as soon as that sentence was stated, Izuku released his plasma beam at the fallen devil, blasting him to smithereens. And with the death of Shalba, everything was seemingly falling into order as Izuku's dragon form stared at the ashes of Beelzebub's descendant before snorting. Looking back at the others, Izuku made sure to search for Asia before letting out a wailing sound of a dragon who lost one of his treasures. And as soon as that was done, Izuku's draconic form fell to the ground unconscious as everyone looked around to see what had happened. And sure enough, there was a group of heroes from the human world standing nearby, and a woman who had pulled back her costume with a seductive smirk on her face. Wow, that took a lot more energy to take him down. I wonder if he's hung right about now, the woman asked, as everyone looked at her like she was crazy. Who are you? Rias asked, as the woman looked at her. Oh dear, please call me Sensei. And I am the pro heroine Midnight, reporting from Principal Nezu of UA Academy. Midnight said, with a seductive lick of her lips. Izuku was sleeping on the bed in his bedroom as we move inwards into his mindscape. He had been in the middle of a nightmare of what had happened when he was under the control of Shalba and the rest of the hero faction. He kept getting flashes of the ones he was forced to kill, especially since Tamura and the rest of the League of Villains had been implanting multiple different memories in order to keep him on their side. He kept seeing multiple weird creatures that were different colors in terms of their skin color, some had scars from battle. But the most important part about them was the brains sticking out from the top of their heads, that even when destroyed only delayed them until their healing factor couldn't keep up anymore. He then appeared in a weird void area that was surrounded by what appeared to be an old castle. Looking up from where he was standing, he saw a man with white hair as well as his eyes covered standing in front of the villain he had killed a few months ago. You will become my plaything once again, one for all. It's only a matter of time before that happens. A taller white-haired man said, as Izuku glared at the vestige. He had seen similar vestiges to know that this was a vestige world that he had to be wary of, considering Dedrag shouldn't be too far away from him in this world. The entire vision had changed to each other hero that the younger brother had shown as they were meeting their demise against the man. What does all of this mean? Izuku asked, mentally. He had long since noticed that he didn't have a mouth within this realm, considering that he couldn't use the full power of this quirk yet. Hello little ninth. Although, I think the right term would be draconic ninth. A familiar voice called out. Looking to his right, Izuku saw the same man looking at him with similar green eyes as his own. Who are you? Izuku asked, mentally. You can't speak to us right now, but this is the only time I can tell you anything at the moment. Soon enough we will reach singularity. In the time before that happens, we will be giving you our quirks. Be sure to master each one of them and catch Tamura Shigaraki. The man said, as he then gained a momentary clarity. Also, my name is Yoichi Shigaraki. And I am the first one to use One for All. Within my body was where One for All was birthed. Yoichi said, as he expelled Izuku from his mindscape. Guua. Izuku gasped as he sat up from the bed he was laying on. Looking around the room, he soon found everything around himself floating in the air as he lowered himself to the ground. Letting in big gulps of air, he held a hand over his chest as he felt some sort of pain there as he struggled to move around. D-Drake, send a pulse of power, Izuku said, as he collapsed to the ground holding his chest in massive amounts of pain. Cough, cough. As D-Drake heard the coughs of his partner, he sent a massive pulse of power to gain the attention of the devils nearby. And it wouldn't be until a few seconds later that Rias would break down the door into the room to find Izuku coughing up blood and spewing his guts out, not literally, as he tried to breathe in. Immediately placing her 8 pawns into his chest, she watched as each one glowed with a crimson, emerald glow before lowering into his chest. It wouldn't be until a few minutes later that Izuku started to have a better time breathing and was now just dry heaving as he struggled to sit back upright. Izuku, are you alright? What in the hell was happening to you? Rias asked, as she pulled Izuku into a hug with his face into her massive bust. Not that I cough. Want to change the subject. But what happened to me after being controlled? Izuku asked, stuttering and coughing a bit. His eyes were bloodshot as if they were having a second chance at life through getting oxygen. He hadn't even noticed that his eyesight had gone blurry in the time he was struggling to breathe. You had disappeared for about 4 days since the whole trip to Kyoto. You had managed to save Yusaka and alert her faction to the attack on their soil by the hero faction that wasn't controlled by Nezu and the HPSC within the world. Rias said, as Izuku nodded. I don't know what happened to me, but whatever fit I just had to do with the evil pieces not being within me. Izuku said, dry heaving again. A few hours later Izuku was drinking a massive amount of water as he tried to clear his throat out with how dry it had been. Mickey and Goro had been looking at him with worry as soon as he had arrived without being awake. Even midnight had come by multiple times in order to try and help them out. But without a doctor on hand to help them out, even when Recovery Girl had come by, she just said that Izuku needed rest. But now that they saw him, they were confused as to why he had been dry heaving, with it only being explained what happened by Rias about what he went through. Izuku was now sitting on the couch with a notebook about heroes and their quirks in his hand as he was watching the news about new heroes out on the street at the moment. He was keeping an eye out for Tamura and the rest of the League of Villains, considering the fact that he could be out there on the human plane searching for more allies for himself. Any news about Tamura himself was enough for him to head out, search for him and put an end to him, whilst he was unaware of the fact that he was Nana Shimura's grandson. As soon as the day hit mid-afternoon, Izuku had decided that he was done being cooped up inside his home and went for a walk around Kuo town. He had been getting more and more antsy ever since he had woken up and he wanted to get out and stretch his limbs for a bit. He then had the feeling of being tugged softly as he entered Kuo Park. Accepting his summons, Izuku appeared in an office where a small magic circle was placed on the ground as he looked at his surroundings. He saw that there were 3 people staring at him in shock before they were replaced with serious expressions. So you are the one who put down All for One for good? A vaguely familiar voice called out. Looking to his right, he found Bakugo standing there, not with a smirk ready for battle, but a subdued one. Looking over at the man addressing him, he saw that he was wearing a suit and tie, as well as had green hair with a golden fringe at the front. Wow, you really look similar to Azazel, sensei. So what do you need from me, Sir Night-Eye? Izuku asked, as Night-Eye had the decency to look impressed. Great deductions from a mere glance, I can see what All Might saw in you when he gave you the quirk. Sir said, as Izuku looked over at Bakugo, who had gotten a glint in his eye. Are you sure you wish to talk about that whilst he is here? Izuku asked, pointing at Bakugo. Hey, you should be aware that I need to know this shit, especially since I am going to be working with you. Bakugo said, as Izuku looked at him tiredly. He already knows about the fact that you have All Might's quirk, and that he chose you as his successor. He is being trained to become Mirio's successor as of this moment, and we will need to discuss something that needs to be addressed. Sir Night-Eye said, with an even more serious expression than before. So are you going to tell me about this, or are we going to continue to waste time? I thought I only gave Ochako these slips. Izuku said, as Sir looked at Bakugo. I stole one of them from Round Cheeks because we need your strength as well as magic bullshit to help us with a raid. Bakugo said, as Izuku glanced to him. Alright, who are you raiding? Izuku asked, as Sir began a long-winded explanation about the Shihasaikai. Alright, so let me get this straight. You, Sir Night-Eye, want me to work together with him, the one who told me to kill myself about a year ago, in order to save a little girl who was being abused by someone who said that they were their father? Izuku asked, as Sir Night-Eye just sighed. I knew that this would be a lost cause. He said, before he was about to break the summons. I never said that I wouldn't do it, just as what it pertains to the summons, you need to give me something in order to earn my services. Izuku said, as Sir Night-Eye just glared at him. So you received All Might's quirk as a reward for killing All for One? Quote. Night-Eye glared at Izuku with a growl. You know, if you get even more pissed off, I might as well state that All Might told me that it wasn't a gift. He wanted someone who could last longer as the symbol of peace and show all villains that even when he wasn't around there wouldn't be anywhere they could hide. So long as someone held the same mantle of symbol of peace, they wouldn't be able to be villains for very long. Izuku said, as Night-Eye just glared at him harder. What do you want from us if you will take on this mission? Bakugo asked, as Izuku looked at him. With a smirk on his face, everything changes to a different scene as we find ourselves at the place where the raid is taking place. Using his magic, Izuku had already gotten inside the building and had found Eri and was making his way with his magic in order to escape the building. Even if Chisaki Kai was going to escape, he wouldn't have the person who could increase his production of quirk erasing bullets. As soon as the raid had begun, nobody had been the wiser about the presence of Eri not being inside the building as Izuku appeared outside with the police. Placing Eri on the ground, Izuku walked over to Eraserhead as he gave her to the man as he looked at Izuku. Why are you handing a child over to me? He asked, as Izuku just let out a strained smile on his face. I am going to go back inside there and murder that son of a bitch who was experimenting on her. Not only that, but when I am through with him, he will only be a smear on the ground, Izuku said, before disappearing from Eraserhead's view. So, is he going to be my big brother? Eri asked, as she looked up at Eraserhead. God, I hope not, Eraserhead said, as Eri looked at him confusedly. But he saved me, she said, as Eraserhead stared at her. He is a problem child, and if I know anything about problem children, they have a lot of baggage on their shoulders if you want to be with them, he said, as the little girl nodded, not really knowing what he meant by that. From what she saw of him when she did see his face and eyes, they were really kind, and his skin was rough, but he was soft, gentle with her as he passed her on to the weird hobo man. Shaking her head, she just watched as the heroes had started to raid the place as screams filled the air from Chisaki Kai. And he was in a world of pain at the moment. Inside the Shihasaikai base, Izuku was slowly moving towards Kai Chisaki. The man was now a sobbing mess on the ground as he tried to fix all the damage dealt to him from Izuku himself as he growled at him. So, what did you think would happen when you tried to hurt a little girl? Izuku asked, as he placed a foot onto Kai's arm, breaking the bone. Gra-aha, he screamed in agony as Izuku slammed a palm onto Overhaul's face, silencing his screams of agony. I asked you a question, you better answer me. There are always the words that history always said about dragons. Never anger a dragon, Izuku said, as he glared at Kai. The man garbled his spittle in his mouth before coughing vehemently as Izuku kicked him into the wall. His patience was wearing thin with the man, he had half a mind to just kill him right now. I did it all for the annexation of mankind. They are all suffering from disease. Kai said, as Izuku placed his foot on Kai's neck. What kind of disease are you referring to? Because if you are talking about quirks themselves, they were a blessing passed down to humanity by God himself. I'm not sure if you realize this, Kai, but the world you live in is so much larger than you realize. Izuku said, revealing his dragon and devil wings. Kai stared at Izuku in horror as he asked the only question that could come to his mind. I thought the League of Villains had captured you. Kai asked, as Izuku chuckled. They did, they just didn't account for the fact that I could break free of their mind control with a mere memory about my past life. Izuku said, as he glared at Kai once again. Now tell me what made you think causing so much mental trauma to a 6-year-old girl made it right to experiment on her as if she was nothing more than a lab rat. Izuku growled as garbled noises came from behind Izuku. Lying on the ground far behind him were the bodies of Twice and Toga Himiko, blood seeping from their orifices. Meanwhile outside, everyone had looked at the building with trepidation as Aizawa kept Eri busy by holding her inside a police vehicle. So should we enter the building to apprehend Overhaul? I believe that we have the chance to stop him here and now. A police officer said, as a female one walked over shaking her head. Did you see the boy who ran back in there? He was on a mission, and if there was anything I know about parentage, he views the little girl as his baby. I felt as though I were looking at a dragon when I saw the rage in his eyes. She said, as the police officer gauged. Really, a dragon? We all know that they are just folk tales. The officer said, as the woman smirked. Really? Then why are we seeing a dragon's claw marks on the walls inside the building? The female officer said, showing images. It could be his quirk at play. The officer said, stuttering. That boy has no quirk. I checked his name in our systems. He is quirkless by all accounts. And I believe that the reason that is because he is the dragon of legend. At least from Wales, the female officer said, as everyone stared at her in a confused manner. Izuku stood in the middle of the hallway. He had finished talking to Kai as he looked at the bloodstained wall with fury but at the same time sadness. The man was only trying to take away all the powers that humanity had, and keep his own in order to seem like an all-powerful god. But at the same time, Izuku could understand where he came from. In a world where everyone had a power that could be seen as heroic, he was abandoned by his own family and lived his life in the Yakuza trying to increase their notoriety. But he became too power-hungry in order to save the world. He allowed himself to fall to the lowest part where humanity should never go. Torturing a child for no good reason other than her quirk being capable of rewinding things back to where they were before they existed. Izuku knew that the power of a quirk like Ares would catch the attention of some villains, and he had noticed that Twice and Toga had tried to escape whilst he defeated Overhaul. And killed them immediately without remorse. They tried to turn him on his friends and get him to kill Rias, Akano, Ravel, Kaneko, Kiba, and all the others. Hell Sao had tried to force him to work with them in order to take down the yokai faction without anyone being the wiser. Walking over to the dead corpses of Twice and Toga, he pulled out the small object that was within their grasp. A container of quirk erasing bullets within had been what Izuku had seen as he opened it to make sure that whatever was inside was not dangerous. Looking at the dead bodies on the ground, Izuku decided to make out like a bandit and disappear from the building. Allowing for the officers outside to feel his presence was no longer present and enter the building only to see the bodies of 3 villains. Appearing in the shul grounds of Ua, Izuku walked over to Principal Nezu's office in order to tell him about what he had found. As he went to knock on the door, Fury written on his face, he watched as the door opened without him being aware that Nezu knew about his presence. "How did you?" Izuku asked, as Nezu chuckled. "I have cameras everywhere on campus, and I could also feel your fury coming from a mile away. So I made tea in order to try and calm you down," Nezu said, as Izuku sat down in the seat. "I killed all 3 of them." Izuku started as he grabbed the cup of tea. "As much as I would say that is against the law, you are a devil and dragon, so I can't tell you what to do. I am at the bottom of the food chain," Nezu said, as Izuku huffed. "Villains wouldn't be a problem if you all killed the most dangerous ones instead of placing them behind bars," Izuku said, as Nezu chuckled even more. "Villains have died inside prisons before, especially the more dangerous ones. But this talk isn't about that. What are you here for, Midoriya-kun?" Nezu asked, as Izuku placed the container on the desk. "I came here to make sure that the heroes had these." Izuku started as Nezu picked up the container. "From what it seems like, these were meant to be shot at something. Or someone, preferably a hero or police officer or another villain," Nezu surmised as Izuku nodded. "Overhaul created these to become the greatest manufacturer of quirk-erasing bullets to the world. He would have made himself the king of the world with that kind of ability, keeping his own quirk from being destroyed," Izuku said, as Nezu visibly bristled. "Who in the world could have authorized this kind of action? Surely the Yakuza had nobody that could synthesize this kind of drug," Nezu said, as Izuku shook his head. "He was torturing a little girl, breaking her body apart and bringing her back without a single care about her mental trauma of being killed like that many times. Her name is Eri, and her quirk allows her to rewind the time on any organism as well as object to the point that they don't exist anymore," Izuku said, as Nezu bristled even more. "I believe I know what he did now. He tore her body apart, collected the blood and placed it under surveillance, then he synthesized it to the point that it would rewind a quirk out of existence." "What were his plans about using this kind of drug?" Nezu asked, as Izuku clicked his tongue. "He was going to shoot one of the heroes with it, and demand compensation in order to sell it to the police as well as heroes to bring in villains much easier. Then he was going to sell it to the villains so that they could have an easier time in taking down the heroes. All in all, he was planning on making society dependent on him and his creation of the quirk-destroying bullet, or as I have been mentally calling them, the QDBs," Izuku said, as Nezu nodded. "I thank you for bringing this up with me. We will make sure that nobody gets their hands on them, and I will make doubly sure that the little girl doesn't experience the same kind of torture when we experiment with her quirk. She will be given great care under Aizawa, and he will make sure that her training with her quirk will go swimmingly," Nezu said, as Izuku stood up. "I need to head back to Kuo. I hope you all continue your lives without needing my assistance anymore. Because after this, I will be keeping an eye out for the League of Villains if they are nearby Kuo town. If any of them enter the town, be sure to have some police scouring through alleyways within Musudafu," Izuku said, walking to the door. Turning back to look at the principal, the small animal could almost feel a sort of pressure on him as Izuku smiled at him with sharpened teeth. "Because all that will be left of them will be body parts," Izuku said, as he left the building in a wisp of magical nodes. "I really need to make sure we all learn magic. I wonder if some of the angels would be willing to teach us," Nezu questioned aloud, unaware of the fallen angel nearby feeling a disturbance in the force. 3. Izuku teleported back into his home within Kuo town as he went to lay down on his bed. His talk with Principal Nezu of Ua Academy had been very long as well as filled with some bits of fun as he was challenged to a game of chess. He had lost, but it was really hard to actually defeat the principal. Even the principal himself had informed Izuku that that game of chess was the most fun he'd had in years. Now, as he laid on the bed, he felt it compress as Ravel appeared in front of him as she snuggled next to him really close. Pulling her body close to his own, Izuku snuggled her as close to his chest as possible as she let out a sigh of relief as they both fell into the world of dreams. In the depths of his dreams, Izuku found himself staring at Didrag as the dragon himself had been staring at him with complete confusion as well as worry. "What are you doing here, partner?" Didrag asked, concerned. "What are you talking about? Didn't you bring me here?" Izuku asked, when a third person appeared, although very faded. "I brought you both here," the faded person said, as Izuku gave the man a much more visible body to be seen. Both dragon and human looked at the man as he stood in front of them without a speck of fear within their bones as they looked at the two. "So, is there a reason as to why you brought us here?" Izuku asked, before realizing he didn't know the man's name. "My name is Yoichi Shigaraki, and I am known as the first user of One for All. I would personally like to thank you for taking my brother down once and for all." "Personally," Yoichi's spirit said, as he gave Izuku a sad smile. "Well, you're welcome. Is there anything else we should be worried about?" Dedrag questioned. "You should know that my brother didn't leave his student all alone out there. He has his own set of allies who know about the supernatural world that you both live inside of. He has made allies with a group called the Chaos Brigade, and I have no clue as to how he did this. But keep an eye out for whoever wishes harm on the devils. Especially evil dragons," Yoichi said, as he slowly faded out of view and was replaced with a tall woman. "Wow, I thought he'd continue to brood like he always did," the woman said, as Dedrag started to laugh hysterically. Shaking his head, Izuku turned to the woman as he waited for her to speak to him. If Yoichi was finished, he would be brought back to the living world. "Is there anything else you would like to talk about?" Izuku asked, as the woman spoke. "Well, considering you're being nice about it, One for All has reached singularity. It's only a matter of time before you start wielding the various powers of a 7 wielders of One for All for yourself. Although, you already know how to fly, so you will easily get my quirk under control under your various sets of skills," the woman said, before slamming her fist into her hand. "Sorry, my name is Shimura Nana. It's nice to meet you, Midoriya Izuku. Tell Toshi that I said hi," she said, before disappearing into the world that One for All created not too far away from Dedrag's sacred gear was placed. Well, that happened. The next morning Izuku was seen moving throughout the park as he trained himself even harder than before. Hearing 2 of the previous wielders of One for All tell him about threats coming closer to Kuo and that he will be their target most likely. Not to mention that he was soon to be gaining the previous wielder's powers, except for All Mights. He had heard from the man himself that he was quirkless before gaining the power himself, so that much was not really news to him. Although it would have been great to see what All Might's power was from birth. So here he was training to his heart's content when he heard movement nearby that caught his attention. Looking over to it, he soon found what the commotion was about. A group of people were surrounding a child who seemed to be having trouble traversing the area. Moving over to the child, Izuku found out that it was just Malika's who had just came to Kuo in order to explore. And being the bigger sibling that he never had, he showed Malika's around Kuo town and watched the boy as he gained an extremely happy expression over his face. He was looking at everything in wonder as well as awe. He was actually recording everything since he thought that the boy was only here for one thing. To see his older aunt who loved within Kuo town. He showed Malika's around the town for a little while longer before showing the boy to her home within the town. The two entered the building as they knocked on her front door as Akino opened the door to see Izuku holding Malika's on his shoulders. She let the two in as they both conversed about things for school, and Malika's jumped off Izuku's shoulders and ran to find Rias in the kitchen who was making a late breakfast. Sitting in the living room with Akino, Izuku looked at the young woman as she smiled at him. "So, what brings you and Malika's here? I could have sworn that he was in the underworld," Akino questioned curiously. "I met him whilst I was training in Kuo Park. He was surrounded by the populace as they were cooing over him. So I showed him around town and brought him here, believing that he wanted to see his aunt. I got to act like the older sibling again. It's been so long since I saw the orphanage that I was raised in. It felt nice to be the older brother again," Izuku said, as Akino smiled. "Well, you are doing a good job at that, but I am sensing there is a problem at the moment," Akino asked, looking at Izuku closer. "Yeah, I got a weird dream last night about the previous bearers of the power gifted to me by All Might himself," Izuku said, as Akino nodded. "Okay, what did they have to tell you?" Akino asked, as Izuku looked into her eyes. They told me that there is a new threat within the Chaos Brigade that could be a danger to all of us. And he told me to avoid all evil dragons. Do you happen to know where some of them are located? Izuku asked, as Akeno thought about it. I wouldn't happen to know where they are. It's been a very long time since the last evil dragon was seen. If they are still around, they are following a very certain one. I can't seem to remember their name though. Akeno said, as Izuku nodded. The one you need to be extremely wary of, partner, is Crom Croc. He is the only evil dragon on par with me in my prime level of power, and he is the only heavenly dragon class dragon you would face in your lifetime. Dedrag said, as Izuku nodded. Off in the sandy deserts of Egypt, a black dragon with golden tints to its armor and hide was seen moving about the skies. He roared out to the heavens as he sensed a high magical presence within the human world that he roamed. Dedrag, and the long, lost sacred gear. Boosted gear lives. I must test this new user of the gauntlet. If they impress me, I might just train them myself. A very gruff and tired voice growled out as he took even higher to the sky. As the dragon continued to roar out to the heavens, a devil was staring at the dragon with some slight fury. I can't believe that my power still isn't enough to control that bastard. Don't worry, father, I will show you that I deserve to be your son. And after that, Valley Lucifer, you will be next. The man said, as he disappeared in a light blue sigil. A few weeks has passed as he trained himself for the next big threat that would come towards Kuo Town. He was in the basement of his home as he was physically training his body to the point that he could wield One for All and the boosted gear at the same time. Over the last few months since he had killed All for One, he had shown that he needed the strength and stamina to hold both powers at the same time. So here he was, in the training room, increasing his physical look so that his muscles and stamina could be increased. He had learned how to send the power of One for All through all of his limbs in order to wield the power safely without hurting his body. When activating the power through his body, which he called full cowling, he found that he could utilize the power at around 45% efficiency from the start. He was happy finding that out, but he wanted to make sure that he could utilize the full power of the quirk and build up more on top of that as a whole. Currently, with it having been a few weeks since he had heard the news about a new threat coming to the supernatural world, he had managed to gain at least 15% more control over One for All. Alright, I can use around 60% of One for All right now. But if I use the boosted gear, I can make sure that I can get to a pseudo 100%. And from what I can see, I am being haunted by the previous bearers of the quirk. Izuku muttered to himself as he wrote it down in a notebook. Now the problem is, how can I make sure that I can use both powers at will, without even losing too much stamina? Izuku muttered as he went over many different ideas in his head. Have you ever thought to use a small percentage of One for All as well as use me to the maximum? Dedrag questioned. No, but I feel as though I would run through my reserves of energy faster if I were to do that. Izuku said, as he looked to his hand. Try it out first before you make that suggestion, partner. I would rather find out how much power is being drained from your energy pool than just sit here and complain about it. Dedrag quipped. Letting out a sigh, Izuku stood up from where he was currently sitting. Moving into the middle of the training room, Izuku activated full cowling One for All at around 10%. Then as soon as that happened, he noticed something surprising. Whenever he used a weaker form of One for All, the lightning that usually came with him using full cowling just vanished from sight. Thinking that it was his body absorbing the excess energy the stronger he is, he pulled out the boosted gear. The armored red claw appeared from his left hand, replacing his human one as it sat there waiting to be used. Here goes nothing. One for All. Full cowling. 10%. Boosted gear. Maximum boost. Izuku shouted in the room. The room began to glow an ominous green and red color. But before long the powerful light coming from his body had slowly died out as Izuku stood in the room with red and green electricity moving about his skin. He looked around his body to find the small sparks of excess energy moving about, sparkling all the same. Lifting his arm, he went into a fighting stance and went to do some shadow boxing as he is thrusting his fists into the air. Once his little flurry of attacks was completed, he ended his combo with a spinning kick that slammed into one of the punching bags behind himself. The attack atomized the bag instantaneously. Dedrag, I think we should probably keep the boosts to a minimum as well. Izuku muttered as Dedrag spoke up. Well, at least we know the damage to non-living organisms should this maximum boost smash into them. What percentage of One for All were you using, by the way? Dedrag questioned. That was only using 10% of One for All, Dedrag. One for All is really overpowered, Izuku said, in awe. Damn right we are, kid. A feminine voice called out. Who was that? Izuku called out, looking around the training room. Ah, that must be one of the previous bearers. Don't worry, I will shut them up. Dedrag said ominously. I regret nothing, the feminine voice called out, before a smacking sound was heard. Comma 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 comma. About a couple of days since the training incident, as Izuku and Dedrag called it, and Izuku was now standing in the ORC. He was overhearing about a new mission that the underworld wanted him to set out upon in terms of everything that was happening. It appeared that the hero faction within the supernatural was starting fights between the different factions. And he was being called in to put a stop to the whole thing and make sure to bring it all to a peaceful resolution. Izuku was shaking his head at how the leaders of each faction couldn't do this themselves but remembered that their factions required them to stay within range. So, here he was, standing in what amounted to be a battlefield as two people stood out afar from him. He mentally growled when he saw Cao Cao as the young man was seemingly fighting an enraged Yusaka. She had been landing very bad blows to the young man as he was struggling to even hold her back as she used her full power. But he was still tossing her around. If anything, Izuku would say that Cao Cao thought of Yusaka as a mere foothold in his mission to eradicate all supernatural creatures from existence. Sighing, he dropped from the height he was watching the fight and landed behind the hero faction fighters. He saw warriors such as Jeanne d'Arc, Heracles, Hercules himself, Cao Cao, and many others fighting strong opponents. Even Valley was on the battlefield having some fun with some of the small fry of the yokai faction's best warriors. Cracking his neck, whilst simultaneously gaining the attention of everyone else on the field, he took a few steps forwards. Cao Cao had decided to open his mouth as he stared at Izuku from afar with a slightly concerned expression. What brings the Red Dragon Emperor here? Come to join us in our crusade against the factions of the world? Cao Cao questioned, glee filling his expression. No, I'm not here for joining your cause, Izuku said, as he muttered something under his breath that nobody could hear. One for all, full cowling, 20%, boost minimum, Izuku muttered. Disappearing from sight, he reappeared in front of Cao Cao as he slammed his fist into the young man's eye. Tearing it from its socket as it also launched him off into the distance, a new fighter rushed towards him. Slashing their sword in his direction as he easily dodged the attack and pulled out Ascalon from his boosted gear and slicing through their body with a mere flick of his wrist. The unknown person had fallen to the ground in two pieces as everyone watched on in horror and surprise. Speed blitzing the next opponent of his, Izuku appeared in front of Heracles, descendant as he used a flurry of punches and kicks before using a super move as the heroes of Musudafu would call it, blasting Heracles away. Pseudo 110% Galaxia detention, Izuku muttered, before Heracles was blasted away from the battle. Looking over at the other hero faction members, Izuku watched Valley in specifics as the young man was staring at him like he was some meat in the middle of a desert. Entering a combat stance, Izuku prepared for a fight to occur. When he felt a presence coming from behind as he spun his body around. Instantly he found someone else there standing just a few feet taller than him. It was Heracles as he reached an arm out to grab him. Kicking Heracles in the stomach, staggering him slightly, Izuku grabbed onto his arm before judo flipping him to the ground in front of himself. He pulled out Ascalon before slamming it into the man's chest, causing blood to spurt out of his chest and mouth before he kicked Heracles' body out of the blade. As soon as Heracles was on the ground near Hercules, Izuku used his magic to pull back Ascalon into his hands. Everyone present watched as Izuku silently pulled his hand across the blade to clean it of the blood on it. He pulled it to his hip as he looked at everyone present, before feeling yet another presence behind himself as Cao Cao had thrusted his true Longinus spear at him from the back. Twisting his body around to dodge the attack just barely, he swung his blade at an angle causing the man to jump back. "You know what, I'm done with this. Yasaka, you might want to flee from this area and take its location off the map," Izuku said, as he raised his blade into the air. A red aura came over Izuku's body as he used an increased amount of the boosted gear's boosts as well as one for all. Once he reached a maximum strength of around 500% over his available usage of the quirk, he activated an ancient ability from his ancestor. A red plasma erupted from Ascalon as the beam traveled into the atmosphere as Izuku stood holding his blade. Everyone present watched on in horror as a familiar face was blasted through their minds of a young woman with blonde hair and an unruly smirk on her face glaring at all of them. "Clarent, Blood Arthur," Izuku screamed out, as he slammed his blade on the ground. "Clarent, Blood Arthur," the female warrior called out as she mimicked him. As the plasma beam smashed into the ground, it was broken up by a massive explosion reaching its epicenter. Standing in the middle of the crater was Izuku, and he wasn't even fazed by what had happened around himself. Although the same couldn't be said about the heroes surrounding himself, as most of them laid on the ground in pain. Izuku stepped out of the crater as he merely shrugged off the dust and debris from his shoulder as he walked over to Cao Cao. The young man had seen better days, both of his eyes were now gone. And his entire form was completely banged up. He wouldn't be capable of getting both of his eyes back after this. "You just had to go and instigate a war between all the factions, didn't you?" Izuku questioned as he kneeled next to the downed man. "I am trying to prove that humanity can live without the influence of the supernatural," Cao Cao muttered, coughing up spittle. "Yeah, I know, but you should know something first before you attack someone. Think about whether or not they have allies on their side before initiating an all-out attack on them. The yokai faction has some very good allies within the underworld as well as heaven. Even the Norse are great allies to Yasaka," Izuku said, before standing at full height. He may be short compared to everyone present, but his size compared to them all was as something they'd laughed about in the past. Now though, they were truly learning the lesson of judging someone by their looks and height alone. If Izuku had wanted, he could have ended the fight without anyone knowing about it, until it was already too late. And the simple fact that Izuku managed to deal so much damage to all of them, with the exception of Hercules who was standing looking as if nothing hurt him, in one move and looked raring to go another round, said something. Within moments the entire group of heroes left the battlefield, but Izuku caught the eye of one of the women there as she looked eerily familiar. She was looking at him with a forlorn expression, as if wanting to apologize to him for something he'd never done or had to deal with before. She walked over to him for a second, as he stared at her closely. She was blonde and had blue eyes, her hair was in a ponytail as she stood in front of Izuku with a sad smile on her face. She also wore a witch's hat on top of her head. "Why, you're the descendant of Mordred, aren't you?" she asked. "What of it?" Izuku asked. "I just wanted to tell you sorry for what my brother's ancestor did to your own," she said, as Izuku stared at her softly. "If anything, I should be apologizing to you for that, Lefei," Izuku stated as the girl stared at him in shock. "Why, you know my name?" She asked, now completely fearful. "Yes, I did my research on Valley's team. And I got to say, I'm very happy that you didn't fall into villainy completely. You all want what's right for the world, and I can get behind that," Izuku said, as he created a magic circle. "Wait, what's your name?" Lefei asked, looking at him in shock. "The name's Midoriya Izuku, but just call me Izuku," Izuku said, disappearing in a magic circle. What do you mean he defeated the entire hero faction alone? There is no possible way that the Red Dragon Emperor of this generation is that powerful. He can't have gotten and used Juggernaut Drive, Valley would have sensed him from a mile away. A male voice called out angrily. An unknown voice spoke back as the man in the shadows grew even more angered as he slammed his fists on the table. He threw things around the room in his rage as he looked over at the caged animal that was nearby as an evil smirk came over his expression. "You're useless to me now, Cao Cao. Be prepared to have your entire faction wiped off the face of the earth." I have someone who can actually produce results for me, isn't that right? Crom. The man questioned as the dragon in a cage growled angrily before magic was used to calm him down. Don't worry, Crom, I will make sure that you have your vengeance against Drake. He will pay for all the problems he's been causing us. The man stated happily before laughing. We are then shown what he looks like, as he stands around 6 feet 5 in height. He has silver, blue hair as well as the same color for his eyes, and his expression is as near mad as you could get. His clothing attire is that of a silver suit and tie as he looked even more disheveled. Crom then looked at the man before speaking to him with a very angered growl. Don't think that this can allow you to survive any longer. Once I get my vengeance against Drake, then you are next. Raven Lucifer. Even your father has been the greater evil of the two of you. Crom stated with spite. I don't need to worry about you, Crom. I can handle you on my own. Raven stated with a chuckle. Appearing inside the Kuo Academy Occult Research Club, and he was looking around the room and found Rias and the others staring at him in confusion. Just as he was about to leave the room, he found a familiar presence entering his range of detection. Gaining a confused expression on his face, he looked at Rias as she was wondering what was going on with him. Standing up, she walked over to him and asked him a question about what was going on. Are you okay, Izuku? You look as though something happened. Rias asked, slightly concerned. I just felt a familiar presence within Kuo town. I don't know who they are, but all I know is that they are here in the town. Izuku said, moving to leave the room. Well, be sure to not go too far away, Izuku. I will need your help with finding some stray devils around town. Rias said, as Izuku gave her a nod. Leaving the room, Izuku moved down the halls of the old school building as he made his way towards the school gates. As soon as he was outside of the school gates, he rushed down the street as he wanted to be sure that the Hyodo family weren't being murdered. Sensing the powerful being right at the house where he was allowed to live within for the last few months. By the time he arrived at the house, he pushed through the door as he looked around the place with worry written on his features. It was here that he heard the sounds of conversations in the other room, and rushing towards the room itself, he found a peculiar sight to behold. The Hyodo family were talking to one another as they laughed at the joke a woman with a Brazilian skin tone had apparently said. She was very tall compared to both him and the Hyodos as a whole. Her skin was tan-colored with her eyes being a golden hue that reminded him of fool's gold. Her attire was that of an ancient goddess as she smiled at the Hyodo family as they conversed as if they were friends for many years. Who are you? Izuku growled as the Hyodos looked at him in confusion. What are you doing, Izuku? Miki asked, concerned. That is a dangerous woman, Miki-san. Both of you should move away from her immediately. Izuku said, as he audibly growled at the woman. Well, if it isn't the Red Dragon Emperor. I didn't realize that the host of the sacred gear itself would be a relative of mine. The Aztecan woman said, with a smile. What are you talking about? I don't have a relative who looks Brazilian. Izuku growled. So you really don't remember me? Damn it, Hisashi. The woman said, growling the name under her breath. 5. At the name of Hisashi, Izuku growled again as he pointed a very long blade at the woman as she stared at its tip. She then glanced at Izuku and found his eyes to be frantic as well as shocked for the moment, and as she took in his stance, she found that he was in a fearful stance. She stood up as she moved the sword out of the way of her walk towards the young Drake as the Hyodos were worried for a moment about the two. The woman had managed to stand right in front of him as she made him appear as though he were a toddler compared to her own height. She stood at a massive 10 feet tall, and she had to literally lower her head slightly in order to stand at full height in the living room. She then moved a hand slowly in Izuku's eyesight as she immediately caught his eye tracking her movement. Are you sure that you don't know who I am, dear? You should know the person who well created you, the woman stated through a questioning manner. What are you talking about? My mother is dead. My father abandoned me. Izuku said, slowly moving away from her hand. He did what? She growled. My father abandoned me at an orphanage. I never even got to meet my mother because my father told me she was dead. Izuku said, as the woman sighed in exasperation. Do you even know where your father is? She asked, the tension in the room palpable. Why would I tell you? For the last time, who are you? Izuku said, regaining his confidence again. Well, if you must know Izuku. My name is Maya Kukulkan, and I am the dragon Lukuo, or in other words, Quetzalcoatl, the dragon of the Aztecs, she said, as Izuku's facial expression was confused before the realization dawned on him. Izuku stood in shock as he stared at the woman in front of him. The woman smiled down at him with something akin to a mother's love hidden behind her eyes. And Izuku couldn't find himself really saying what she had stated was wrong. He never grew up with a mother, if anything. His father had left him the first chance he'd gotten in order to work over in the States. But to see that his mother was from the Aztec nation within Mexico was definitely concerning for himself to think about. So you're telling me that you're my mother? Izuku asked, as the woman nodded. Not only that, but I am of Aztec descent. Izuku questioned again. Pretty much, I am the goddess that they worship, even though I'm a dragon in nature. Maya said, as she lovingly looked at Izuku. So why didn't you come find me earlier? When I needed you most as a child, you never came. Why did it take you so long to find me? Izuku asked, now feeling as though he were having a mental breakdown. I tried searching for you. But no matter where I looked, I couldn't find you. But when I heard about some movements of a certain red dragon emperor, I had to see if you were nearby. Maya said, as Izuku thought about his next question. Where were you this entire time? I needed you when I was in the foster care system. Izuku said, as Maya smiled at him. I was busy protecting the people who worship me. I may be your mother, but my job as a protector must always come first, no matter how much I care about you more than them. Maya said, as Izuku just sat on the couch. I don't even know what to think anymore. I'm the descendant of an Aztec dragon goddess, not only that, but also the descendant of Mordred, the supposed son of King Arthur, who apparently was both female. Izuku muttered as he placed his hands on his head. Mordred and Arthur were female. Maya questioned, curious. Don't even question it. Nobody will even be capable of getting to the bottom of it. Mr. and Mrs. Hyodo told Maya as the woman nodded. As the small family were beginning to talk about future plans, Izuku decided to just head to bed for the night. He had plans on whatever he was supposed to do the next day, and he'd rather be fully mentally and physically prepared for whatever the world had planned for him. After the whole day with his biological mother entering his life, Izuku had spent the night in his bedroom thinking about everything up until this point, how he'd been abandoned by his father. All the way to the point of which he'd gained enough power to be recognized by those around him as a powerful warrior and individual. Most of that was thanks to Didrag and Rias, but he felt himself smirk at the fact that everything was going to be alright for once. Leaving the house the next morning, Izuku prepared himself for whatever Rias and the peerage would have him do for the day. He'd heard from them that Azazel had something prepared for them all this time, as he wanted to be sure that nothing could go wrong this time around. Especially with everything that happened between him and the hero faction in the underworld. Entering the old school building and making his way towards the orc, he entered the room with a small smile on his face. He found everyone looking at him in confusion as well as concern when he looked up at them with a determined expression. I take it that you enjoyed your little present I gave you? Azazel questioned with mirth in his eyes. I should have known you'd have something to do with what happened last night. Izuku said, as he sat down next to Kaneko. What is he talking about, Izuku? Rias asked, confused. My biological mother showed up at the Hyodo household yesterday. The whole situation has been handled by the way, Izuku said, looking to Rias. By the way, we've been wanting to know about that for a while. Who is your mother, Izuku? Akeno asked, curiosity in her eyes. Well, I guess it wouldn't hurt to say her name here. But her name is Maya Kukulkan, and she is the goddess of the Aztec pantheon and also a dragon in nature. She is the Aztec dragon of death and resurrection. I'm sure that you can connect the dots from there, Izuku said, as everyone stared at him as though he really was more royal than Rias. Wow, if I never surmised that you'd be a god, or the son of a god, then you really did have your magic and other things suppressed. Rias surmised as Azazel nodded. His mother had me do it. Azazel informed as everyone looked to him. Why? Izuku asked, now even more confused. You're the child of an Aztec god, and you were born from a man of Japanese descent. That is an interspecies breeding of the highest order in terms of pantheons. Your mother was just protecting your heritage from those who wanted to use you against her. And it worked entirely in her favor as you didn't get sought out until you entered Kuo. Azazel said, as Izuku just sat there with more on his mind than the previous night. But that kind of thing can wait for more answers another time. The underworld is setting up a new kind of game for everyone. The Young Devil rating games are going to begin in a few months, the Devil Kings just need to prepare everything. Azazel said, as everyone nodded. Young Devil rating game, I take it that's for the young devils within Rias, Baku's age range. Izuku asked, curiously. The very same, the only difference this time around, is the simple fact that only about 6 candidates were chosen to represent the new generation of young devils. Azazel said, as he pulled out a folder with multiple names. So what is the plan? Kiba questioned, as he looked at the folder handed to him. What you all are going to be doing, is spending most of the time you have right now training yourselves up for the rating games. You will be taking part in only 2 games as you will be vying for the top spot amongst all of your young devil compatriots. The names of which are as follows. Azazel said, pausing for dramatic effect. They are of the families Baal, Astaroth, Citri, Agaras, and Glacia, Labelas. And they will be the ones vying for the prize for whoever wins the Young Devil tournament. Azazel said, looking at each person in Rias, peerage. Now what the prize is, you will find out at the next Young Devils meet and greet. Although there will be another prize for if the Red Dragon Emperor manages to surpass the strongest of the Young Devils, Saraorg Baal. Azazel said, as that piqued Izuku's interest. And what is the prize on that one? I can't be too sure about what it would be. I'd want, considering the fact that I haven't really done too much to garner the amount of attention that I've gotten in the last month or so. Izuku said, as he sat on the couch rubbing his chin. Izuku, did you forget what you'd managed to do a few days ago? Azazel questioned. Not that much I recall. But I did go against the entire hero faction 2 days ago. They weren't much in terms of strength aside from Heracles' reincarnation. Izuku said, before muttering about the other reincarnations. And you've lost him, just tell him what it was that the Devil Kings plan on doing for him. Rias said, with a sigh. Well, they plan on upgrading his devil ranking in terms of the devils within the underworld as a whole. Azazel said, causing Izuku to pause in his muttering. Raise my ranking. Wasn't I promoted to a mid-class devil not too long ago? Izuku asked, as Azazel chuckled. Yeah, you were, but because of the amount of power you'd gained from fighting off an entire faction alone. The elders decided that you've gained enough strength in order to receive the rank of high-class devil in the eyes of the elder devils. Azazel said, as Izuku felt his face scrunch in complete offense. I don't have to do everything they ask, right? Such as being placed in a marriage I don't particularly like. Izuku questioned as Azazel thought about it. You can make it a condition about what you want it to be. Azazel said, as Izuku nodded. I'd rather have my choice of who I can marry, although I'd rather not marry anyone as of right now. I'm too young in order to be looking forwards that far into my future. Izuku said, nodding his head. All right, with that all settled, I think it's time for me to leave. You kids have fun in here, and you better not get any pregnancies whilst I'm gone. I'm looking at you, Midoriya. Azazel said, as Izuku looked at him offended. I wouldn't do that. Izuku called out, as Azazel just stared at him blankly. It was a joke, kid, learn to take 'em. Azazel said, disappearing in a warp of black midnight-colored feathers. With the supposed teacher who was in charge of their club out of the room and gone, everyone got into their special positions inside the room as a whole. They were given their suggested training regimens as well as where to train, although Rias had told Izuku to just try and learn how to fight from his mother. Considering the woman had been around the block or two when it came to fighting, as she was a dragon who was really well known. What none of them even noticed outside of the window, however, was a very dark black-colored bird sitting on a branch glaring at Izuku specifically. Its golden, brown eyes glaring holes in the boy's back as it relayed information to whoever was on the other side of its view. It took off flying in the distance as the scene changes into a throne room of gods and goddesses who sat on massive pillars of rock and sediment that used to be made of gold. One of the men in the room sat on the throne of sediment gold, had a dark tanned body as he sat on his throne. His eyes were a deep blue in color as he looked out at the other gods in the room. To match his deep blue eyes, his hair was a turquoise blue and a light tone of it to boot. He held a staff in his right hand with a long anaconda of green color snaking around it towards where his hand waited. His name was Huitzilopochtli, the Aztec god of war and sun. Across from his seat was another god, this one however was feminine. She sat just slightly off to his left but across from him on the other side of the room of thrones within the Aztec pantheon. She was deformed, an amalgamation of the creatures of the planet that made her appear as though she was a monster through and through. Even if she looked as though she were something only a mother could love, she was the goddess of the earth in the view of the Aztecs. Her eyes were a lime green in color with black sclera, and her head was split apart with teeth coming out the top of it with clawed feet. The same was with her hands as the claws on them extended to the full height of an adult man. Her name was Tlaltekutli. And finally, to the left of this woman was another man of the gods. He had a dog face and had many arms moving about his body in a way that a contortionist would dream. He had a deep black eye and a pure golden eye that fit his heterochromatic eyes as he seemed to be smiling at them all. To the Aztec pantheon he was known as the god of fire, and the little brother of Quetzalcoatl, the dragon goddess of resurrection and death. His demeanor was that of neutral but at the same time showing a mirth in his eyes that he couldn't help but show. His name was Shalut. Does anyone wish to tell me as to how Quetzalcoatl managed to have a son behind our backs? Huitzilopochtli questioned with barely constrained rage. Come on, we couldn't have known. Not only that, but whatever Quetzalcoatl's doing with her life has nothing to do with me. I may be the god of fire, but that doesn't mean that I'm in charge of keeping an eye on her child. Shalut quipped as he stood up preparing to leave the room. I don't see how her child is something that we should be worried about. Tlaltekutli retorted. This goes against the very laws we've put in place for thousands of years. How are you two not even having any kind of bad reaction to this? Huitzilopochtli growled. Because it's none of our problems. That's belonging to the Shinto deities to do lists of what they need to figure out. Shalut said, as he happily walked away from the throne room. You're on your own, cousin. Tlaltekutli giggled as her deformed body suddenly fell apart and disappeared in white motes of light. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please make sure to like, subscribe to the channel and comment down your fav part. Now we will see you in the next video.